Thank you so much, Clive, for another wonderful presentation. Now, we've actually got a fair bit of time for questions and discussion and debate, so I'd like to open it up for anyone to contribute. Yeah, so over here.
Hello, I'm Maria from eSeek Intelligence. I would like to thank you for great presentations and have two questions. One is for Patricia, and that is, what is your opinion on master files and will companies comply? And another question for the rest of the panel is, where do you see flavor ban is going in Europe? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to sort of quick lecture on what a master file is. In the pharma world, where a manufacturer doesn't necessarily have information about some of the ingredients that go into his or her product, the upstream ingredient manufacturer or flavor manufacturer can file with the FDA in order to maintain confidentiality, a description of those ingredients and so on. That's really just a subset of the information that needs to be filed. And by the way, for most manufacturers, in the context of the pre-market tobacco applications, which are really the big dossier that I was mentioning, unless you really have very good control of your entire supply chain, if you really don't know what ingredients you have in your product, even if the flavor manufacturer files those ingredients directly with the FDA and to refer back, it's going to be very difficult for you to characterize the risk of your product, because FDA wants you to characterize the risk of every ingredient that goes into the liquid. So again, master files have limited applicability. I think if you want to ask me about pre-market tobacco applications, which are the big dossier, I believe that many companies, such as ourselves, have taken the decision to go forward and do the research. Others, for sure, don't have the resources. It's extremely costly between the many studies that one needs to conduct. And certainly, the real problem is not even the cost, but the time, because FDA really wants, longer-term studies, in particular as to behavioral studies. They want follow-ups at 1 year, and we all know the time is limited. So yes, I do believe that many people will try to put together as best they can the pre-market tobacco application. I believe many won't.
Thank you. Any more questions? Oh, sorry, yeah. Peter.
Well, I mean, I think there's a relationship between the two questions. One being flavour bans in Europe, and the other being the usefulness or not of master files. And it comes down to the general sort of process of product stewardship undertaken by the different manufacturers. In essence, do you know what's in your products and can you characterize it? I rather like the German approach, which looks at specific flavoring compounds, specific substances, and prohibits those, based on a risk assessment, or in some cases based on arbitrary nonsense in the TPD about caffeine and taurine. But I think banning a flavor category, quite apart from being undesirable because it makes the products less desirable to certain consumers, is also impractical, because you can't just say, okay, we're going to ban dessert flavors. Well, someone define a dessert flavor for me in terms of the substances that make it up. It's a very difficult thing to do. So it's clearly one where I think we need to be led by the science, not by the ideology as they have been in, I think it's Finland and Estonia that have banned them now. And that kind of an approach will get us to a place where we have a better idea, what good e-liquid manufacturing looks like.
I think with this reporting system in the TPD, the Commission has all the data should they want to do something, and I think it depends on the next step of regulation, where this discussion is going forward. I mean, conceivably they could do it. I think it's perhaps unlikely. The question is how you deal with the Finnish flavor ban, for example. It's there, it's distorting the market. It's not providing a ground framework for competition, which is the purpose of it. Could that be spreading to other countries? So I think that it's a space that we should watch. The Commission tried to ban flavors in smokeless, which is a problem for us, because all taste from our product comes from flavors. everything because of our go-to text standard. So they might want to do that, but that's something that we need to start discussing, the importance of flavors. Flavors are good because it's created an attractive product.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's a huge amount of confusion in this area. What is the bad thing that they think they're stopping when they ban flavors? It's very unclear. Whether it's something to do with the flavor descriptor or the flavor itself, that seems to be another area of confusion, as Peter was highlighting. I think the worst thing about this is that this directive is supposed to be setting out rules that govern the internal market, so the free trade of goods within the single market. And therefore, you would expect the standards to be broadly similar for products in every country, and a deliberative process established for deciding if particular ingredients were harmful against certain criteria. And I wouldn't be too bothered if there was like a blacklist of things that you couldn't add to e-cigarettes that was agreed at community level, was science-based and everything. But the idea that, oh, this flavour is there to attract children and therefore we're banning it, it's just a complete nonsense, really. So I think we're going off track again, and it just shows how unreliable and unthinking the decision-making is around regulation in the European Union and the member states.
And if I may add, a lot of what's called tobacco flavors really don't have tobacco. So for instance, our product does not have any tobacco in it. But of course, there's a combination of ingredients that make up a flavor that to the consumer mimics the tobacco flavor. So truly, you know, many flavors that are called tobacco really don't have tobacco in them.
Thank you. Over here.
Thank you. David Graham. I was struck, Clive, by the construct that you presented of what, in essence, is very comparable in its paradigm to the way the smoking issue is addressed, in that you are starting with an abstinence approach, and then you are following that with a range of harm-reducing alternatives to regulation itself. And I think the construct of not just looking at abstinence only, but saying here are some alternatives that help the regulator meet their needs, but do it in a way that mitigates harm, is so constructive. And I think Cecilia was saying some of the same things in sense of don't just look at why it's a problem, but here are some viable alternatives that give you what you need but mitigate the risk, is kind of why we're all here in many ways, because we believe in that philosophy that it's about offering viable alternatives that meet certain needs. And I think it sends a tone of, somewhat collaborative tone to try to find a way out of this problem rather than purely in a sort of diametrically opposing conflict. And I think it's very constructive, and I want to applaud it.
It wasn't really intended to be constructive, David. I mean, it's a constant frustration of mine, which is hyperactivity on the part of government, you know, without necessarily having a good case that the regulation that they're introducing produces any benefits at all, and doesn't squander opportunities, to put it mildly. However, there is a propensity to regulate in this area, and I think it's incumbent on us, and I think this is your point, to have ideas about what that should be, and also what it should not be, and just saying, well, get out of here, this is, you know, not appropriate. And that's why I think, for example, arguing for standards like the Gothiatex standard for you know, snus, like the AFNOR standards for e-cigarettes, what I hope will become at some point a standard for heat-not-burn products, will preempt the worst kind of regulatory abuse by putting something reasonably sensible in their way, even if it's not as good as doing nothing.
Can I maybe also add to that, which it's interesting, because it's not only the regulator, there is the tobacco control industrial complex also driving this, and the optics of it is that we will never be as good or saintly as they are. We're just really bad people in the eyes of these people. And I don't know how many meetings I've asked for, and they say 5.3, sorry, we can't meet you. Which is like, is if they would think that they have a person from a tobacco company in the room, and we would brainwash them in some odd way. It's just strange. And I think that's this is an area where we really need to find a face-saving solution for everyone and try to engage in the discussion?
I think the starting point is all wrong in one very fundamental way, in that insofar as the regulators in a particular jurisdiction have been brought round to the point of view shared widely in this room, it is largely on the basis that reduced risk products should be kind of a stepping stone to a zero nicotine society. And I think if we look at this as the least bad thing, then I think we're on a hiding to nothing. I think actually what we need to accept is some people like to use nicotine. And why don't we create an environment in which they can use it in the least harmful way possible? And the way we do that is to build consumer confidence, and the way that we can build consumer confidence is to set that standard that Clive talked about. But once we have that standard in place and it's there, why on earth are we saying to people you cannot make comparative claims about your product? Why on earth are we saying specifically you may not make a comparative claim to a cigarette? That's absolute madness. Surely we should be encouraging people to do so, and by not encouraging people to do so, one cuts off the ability of the company to communicate its core value proposition to its customer, which is, this is way, way better than the thing you're currently doing. And when we do that, we end up with adverts of the bottom half of women in bikinis that people in tobacco control don't like, and it's a vicious circle. And I think fundamentally that's the position that we would need to get to.
Okay, over here in the front.
Thank you. My question's to Cecilia, probably also to Clive as well. Cecilia, you mentioned in your presentation about the move from the e-cig ban in the initial phase to actually including e-cigs in the TPD. Same with the FCTC COP7, the decision to try and ban and then to have that reversed, luckily, thanks to a lot of behind-the-scenes work from the UK. What do you think is the, in terms of going forward, you mentioned the midterm review, what do you think people, scientists, people, what should we be doing in advance to ensure that TPD midterm review starts to look, correct? I mean, Clive, I think when you mean, do nothing, you don't mean, you mean the regulators should do nothing, not necessarily us do nothing, but how would you see that?
In terms of what we should do, the consumers, the industry, the public health in favor of harm reduction, I think first of all, I think we need to agree on what kind of regulation would we want, and I'm all in favor of standards. We have a super good standard, so we wouldn't need to change anything. But I think from the industry perspective, having seen the epic fight between heat-not-burn and e-cigarettes, nicotine versus tobacco, I think we just need to get away from that. I think that's the first step that the industry really have to do. For me, my reduced-risk tobacco product contains tobacco, but it's a plant. The plant material in itself is not the problem, but I think from the industry side, we spend an awful lot of time batching each other, which provides less credibility to what we actually have to offer. And then I think, it's not us, or only us, that should come up with what should it look like. I think it's super important that consumers are here as well, because they're the people that they understand what the consumer need is. And once we have a fairly good idea on what we would like to have, we need to engage with the policymakers, and preferably to start with the European Commission. They are very proud. They like their TPD. It's a success, because that's the political narrative in Brussels. We got what we want. This is fantastic. But I think starting to highlight the problems and also build support in the member states. I think that's also very. Today, if you look at the member states and how they act, they all believe the same thing. So we need to create a critical mass of countries saying, but hey, wait a sec, our smoking prevalence is not dropping. But and get them to encourage other products. And I think it's possible because harm reduction has taken off, but we just need to sustain it and make sure that more and more people in leading positions seize the opportunities with this policy.
Jeannie, a few ideas. I mean, we've got to suppress the driver of wrong here. The people, the researchers, the academics, the institutions, the charities that are basically problematizing this thing. In Peter's words, they're ignoring the opportunity, and they're hunting for nugatory risks and exaggerating them to create the case for oppressive regulation. That has to stop. It has to be challenged everywhere and all the time, really, until that driver of bad policy is switched off. We then need to be able to tell the story about what good is happening. I'm convinced it is, but you can never have too much data. You can never have too many personal accounts. You can never have too many vapors writing to commission officials or politicians telling them their story about how their life has been saved. So we need to press the buttons on the good side of it. Then, having dealt with the bad, push the good, we then need to think about the right and the right things to do in this regulatory framework, some of the things that I've just been talking about, but we need to think about what comes next. Let's just excuse the dog's breakfast that is the TPD as it applies to reduced risk products, and just say, well, okay, that was an emergency interim measure. We understand you were putting it together with sort of elastic bands and bits of old rope and everything. That's how it looks now. Now it's time to do it properly. And what would proper look like? What are those standards? Can we get a CEN standard in time so that they can rely on that instead of silly things about tank sizes and bottle sizes and strength limits and so on? And then finally, we have to make the politics work around this. This has to be the land of political wins. We have to get people to see that there's a breakthrough public health measure here that is actually going to deal with the smoking epidemic, given enough time and enough innovation, that they could be part of that, that it's a good, conservative, left-wing, whatever policy because it's not costing any money, it's working, it's going with the grain of what people want, it's paid for by the users themselves and so on. And let's start to really make the case for it well before these reviews actually come up. And I think if we do that, then fine. And also probably, because Patricia's here, sue someone. Get heavy in court.
I think we tried that. It didn't work out so great. I think that let's also take, in a European context, take into account the broader political picture. As Cecilia quite rightly said, the European institutions have suddenly woken up to the fact that people don't like them very much. It's somewhat amazing that it's taken them so long to do so. But there is a view, I think, within the Commission that a little bit of populism here and there, might go a long way. And certainly the consumer movement plays into that narrative. And it's something that is the strength of which absolutely shouldn't be underestimated. In the end, it was the consumers that protected the category the last time out. It wasn't the industry. I was one of the industry lobbyists at the time. I'd love to say that it was us, but it wasn't. It was the broad-based consumer movement that wrote handwritten letters to their MEPs pleading them not to take their vaping products away. And a little bit of populism, especially in these times, I think would go quite a long way.
Okay, and Judy now.
Hi, Judy Gibson, the International Network of Nicotine Consumer Organisations. That's why we called it INCO, it's just easier. Probably all of you, but Clive, because we work a great deal, our organisations at the moment, especially in Europe, one of the problems I see, and Clive has already said, is this: the TPD allowed far too much individual national interpretation of the TPD. And the biggest problem I see, and I notice nobody's mentioned it yet, and it's something I'm seriously looking at and very worried about, is not only are countries enacting cross-border sales, but what they are doing now, and they are suggesting in Estonia, they have already done so in Finland, and if Finland did it, then probably Poland might. Spain, we have now got a week to respond to Spain, I was told yesterday, because Spain are considering bringing in domestic postal sales ban. Now, think of Spain, I mean Extremadura, Picos de Europa, you can get a cigarette anywhere, I guarantee, wherever you live. But the fact that it's a relatively nascent industry in Spain means that the majority of the people in Spain will not have access unless they are able to get these things on the internet. And finally, may I just say, as a compromise situation, whilst I agree I'm not too keen on 18 either, given that most people started smoking at the age of 14, so patently it didn't stop them, but perhaps the industry need to accept that the interface at the moment on the let's get over it by just pressing yes, I'm over 18, or indeed even putting your birthday in, starting at 1900, is not particularly good. If you want to compromise, I think that there are ways of doing websites that literally you will have to be able to punch in various blah, 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 or have a number, etc. That's the way I might get over it, but I see that as the biggest problem, and it is exactly saying that it is not, this was done for harmonisation. It is the most disharmonious end to it all. Thank you.
I'll just speak to one of those points as someone who does a lot of work for vaping.com, which is, of course, an online marketplace in the US where you have to have that kind of verification. It is hugely detrimental to your business. You lose a vast amount of custom that way, and the risk is that someone less salubrious than yourself will then take that. Now, we, of course, have that verification, but the important thing to in terms of making sure that it works is to ensure that it's uniformly implemented across the board and approved based on standards. I believe there is actually a standard for this, and also I think Belgium banned internal cross-border sales.
Spreading, and it's a precedent. So therefore, because it's a precedent, it allows somebody else because they've done it, and that's the problem. It's insidious.
And of course, you can still not. Even if you're in the UK and you're selling UK-registered product that isn't notified in France, then you have to make sure that your inventory lines up to what's been notified in each country. So yeah, it's a complete mess, and it would be nice if there were just one region, one registration. But obviously, that's not the place that we're in.
It's the nature of the directive. The other alternative would have been a regulation, and then you would have had uniform rules across the EU member states. But what I think you as consumers should do is actually put together messages on this and contact the European Commission and make them aware. Because the more factual information you provide them, the more they have to react.
Yeah, I think the US market is a little bit peculiar because vastly online sales surpass in-store sales, and it was built around online sales, and I do believe that age verification does play a role in the US. Just recently, the Food and Drug Administration, head of the Office of Compliance and Enforcement, emphasized that they have two priorities, and the first priority, iterated 3 times, was age verification, age verification, age verification. And the second one was the sampling ban, which our litigation challenged, of course. So, it is cumbersome to a business, but it is not impossible. And I do believe, contrary to what you say, if there is to be a trade-off, along the lines of what you say, if there is to be a trade-off, that probably should be the trade-off, if anything. But, the industry should not and does not market to minors, and therefore, I think they have to bear the cost of having to age verify.
Yeah, I don't know too much about this, I'm afraid, but it's amazing to me that age verification isn't, already done 1,000 times over. Everybody pays with credit cards or PayPal or something online. How hard can it be to include age information in, the ownership of a credit card? So I'm just amazed that it hasn't been solved, but it does seem to be difficult and expensive, but it should be intrinsic in a service provided by Visa or MasterCard, I would have thought. But it's a license to operate thing. People are worried about, kids buying off the internet, I guess, and therefore they want to stop that. you're completely right, Judy. It's integral to the business model. If you're going to have a large, it follows, if you're going to have a very diverse range of products, you can't have those in every corner shop. And if it's the choice and diversity that is part of the value proposition, then it follows that you would have to have larger, if you like, warehouses, fewer of them, with a postal type distribution system. It's almost integral to the sort of vaping business model, or the sort of vape shop business model. So yeah, we tried to tackle this with Austria, but they just ignored it. And again, it's another example of a completely stupid regulatory intervention that essentially slows down the transition from smoking to vaping, protects the cigarette trade, which doesn't rely on online sales to anything like the same extent. It's completely idiotic, but it seems to carry on. The people behind it are undaunted. The tobacco control community are calling for it. It's, just completely, bad regulatory behavior. What can you do? Just keep making the arguments and maybe try to put something in around age verification. It's probably the only way.
The problem with the online sales, also a big one, especially in a place like Spain, is that some people simply can't get vapor products unless they get it delivered to them by the post. And this is particularly important for people who have disabilities or the elderly, people who have some sort of handicap, and those sorts of stories, I think, would be, if we can gather some of those, that might be quite effective. Now, just over here.
Hi, my question is about the advertising of e-cigarettes and vapes, which I was really interested in, given my background in a previous career was marketing. However, very, very disappointed to see the picture up there with the lady's crotch next to an e-cigarette. And I would argue if anybody thinks that a lady's crotch and an e-cigarette are related, they're probably using e-cigarette wrong. I don't want my daughter to grow up in a world where a close-up of her crotch and a manufactured thigh gap sells anything except for underwear. So my question really is, Clive, at the end of my feminist rant, is we do have to tackle the smoking problem. We really do. It's something that's crucially important. But is it worth conforming to a patriarchal kind of advertisement that will promote mental health issues amongst women? Is it worth it?
Right. So you are making my point very eloquently for me, okay, which is that the issues raised by that ad are not vaping specific, okay? They cover, I tried to emphasize this.
Sorry, I believe that you were saying on it, though, that it was, if it sells it, it's okay, it is targeted above 18s.
No, I said what I was trying to get over was that the issues that are raised by that ad are not specific to vaping, okay? And that you should treat the issues raised by that ad by whatever approach you take to taste and decency and the sort of issues that you're raising.
See, I don't see it as a problem of taste and decency. I see it as a problem of the objectification of women. Okay, so taste, decency and objectification of women. So if you have an approach to advertising that, if we take the approach, if that approach was advertising, let's say, soap powder, okay, and that would be unacceptable for soap powder, then it would be unacceptable for vaping. I don't think the issues raised by vaping are any different. So I was trying to make a different point, which is not necessarily that advertising is bad because it's advertising vaping, but the issues are generic to all advertising, and it should be treated in the same way that all advertising is treated. Do you see what I mean? I do. Thank you for clearing that up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry for being so confusing and such a chauvinist dick.
There is a very simple solution to this. It is stop the madness of companies not being allowed to make claims comparative to a cigarette. 60-odd% of people decide to start vaping because they've heard that it's safer than cigarettes. That is the core value proposition of the category, and yet we can't tell our customers about it. If we could, we wouldn't have that much advertising like this because we would all be focused on our core value proposition. It is another unintended consequence of regulation that certain advertising for vaping products makes some people feel uneasy. There would be a lot less of it if we were able to talk about the one thing that everybody wants to know, which is, are they safer than smoking? And the answer is clearly yes.
Okay, we had another one over there.
Yeah,
I think.
I'd like the comment of the group. do we need more counterfactuals? Sorry, Clive. In the sense of the work that Lars Ramstrom's recently done, demonstrating the amount of loss of life associated with the counterfactual of not implementing a sensible policy. So by concretising that, you actually make it much more salient to regulators and to everybody what the actual cost, potential cost is. When it's totally abstract, people find it very easy to ignore.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea. I mean, obviously, a counterfactual is a scenario, and everyone says, oh, well, that's not a real scenario, that's not a real world thing. But actually, what it does highlight, and we did this in our Amici Curiae brief that we sent along with Patricia's thing, is you only need tiny amounts of extra smoking caused by a badly designed regulatory intervention to wipe out totally any conceivable benefits that you are hoping for from the regulation. You know, I mean, the UK uses a figure of £72,000 per quit. So if you put that in reverse and say each extra smoker you get from this bad bit of regulation that decreases the switching from smoking to vaping, multiply those by £72,000, you're very quickly running into billions of pounds. You know, and those numbers are used in the cost-benefit analysis to justify some types of regulation, but they should also be used to quantify the risks of unintended consequences via counterfactuals like that, which are quite probable. And you know, you can take that further. It was Ron, was that? I can't actually see anybody, but you know, you could take that further and say, well, how many, if you have a value per quit of £72,000 or per extra smoker of £72,000, how many extra smokers do you need to create through bad regulation before they completely destroy the, you know, destroy the purported benefits of these regulatory? Of course, they don't include that in the FDA's cost-benefit analysis or the EU's cost-benefit analysis for the directive.
This is very useful information to put into any submission into the better regulation process, because this is the kind of information that they have to address and think through. Just without perhaps being too aggressive, because I don't think the Commission will appreciate, or they might feel that they're being heavily attacked if people would claim that they're actually responsible, which they are. But it's a face saving. I think in this sector now, it's all about face saving. We need to hand them a way out without them losing face, and then we will be happy and cheerful forever.
Okay, so we're running out of time now, so we'll just keep a few more questions and try and keep them brief. So, yep.
This is for Clive. Clive, in your list of potentially acceptable policy interventions or regulations, I noted one that you did not include, and I think appropriately so, and that's one that we've seen a couple of presentations on here, which is mandating reduced nicotine in combustion cigarettes as a way of tilting the field more strenuously in favor of electronic cigarettes. And while on the one hand I think it's encouraging that we have some really good scientists who have recognized the potential positive role, I would hope that group would take away from this conference, which in theory you would expect would be the most enthusiastic for that type of intervention, that perhaps their time and effort would be better focused elsewhere, perhaps on the appropriate messaging that public health should be delivering on these products.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get a chance to say to Eric Donny that it is a truly terrible idea, reducing nicotine in cigarettes. It's effectively a prohibition of the most popular category in the United States, used by, you know, just under 40 million. It's a massive, visible from space intervention. I was very struck by Helen's presentation this morning. I actually found it very moving. The extent to which smoking is integral in people who really are suffering the greatest disadvantage. You know, people who've got, you know, psychiatric comorbidities, they've got substance abuse problems, extremely poor, you know, the marginalized populations, and smoking is a big thing in their lives. And just to think, well, okay, it'd be great if they all vaped, and I agree with that, obviously, but the idea of getting your hand behind them and giving them a good shove, I just think it's implausible. I think the backlash you get from that, and there's, if you lined up all the smokers that there are, in the United States from 1 to 38 million, and put them in order of how annoyed they would be by that and how resistant they would be by that. Okay, you might be able to push the first few along, but by the time you're getting towards the David Dawns of this world, he doesn't even smoke anymore, but is still angry. You're facing the most almighty hurricane of a backdraft on this. You'll have like war veterans, elderly people in their 80s going, just leave me alone. The amount of pressure you'd have to do, and then they would form a political constituency. And they would be on to their senators and congressmen saying, don't be so bloody ridiculous. Then you go to the law enforcement people, you go to the people who, the FBI or the DEA in the United States, and you say, how about we create a new category of illegal products and criminal activity? How would that help you with your job? So suddenly you get the law enforcement people piling in, saying, this is just absolutely ridiculous, you're making criminals out of people. Then you've got the actual reaction to this, which couldn't, prohibitions don't have a fantastic pedigree, in fact. They have a terrible pedigree. The one thing that won't happen is, whatever it says in the trials, is loads of people smoking low nicotine cigarettes and, weaning themselves off smoking. They'll be buying counterfeit, they'll be buying illicit traded products, they'll be switching to hand-rolling tobacco, cigars, pipe tobacco, hookahs. They will, every possible type of reaction to that perturbation of the supply chain other than the one that everyone hopes for. Okay, in amongst that, there might be a few people who convert to e-cigarettes, hopefully a lot. But I think Deborah, I thought, made the point very well. It's a real violation. It's a real intrusion in people to shove them using coercive measures from one behavior to another. Far better, in the United States and everyone else, we take the brakes off innovation, we get a good regulatory framework in place, we stop the systematic lying that there is about these products, we try to align people's perceptions of risk with reality, and we let the market and consumer preferences do the heavy lifting. If we did that, I think, 20 years from now, we'd see almost all of people converted to reduced risk products. But if there's a few people who don't want to, if there's a few people who've been doing it forever, or they want to start now and then move to reduced risk products sometime later, as long as they've got the choice, I'm okay with that. I don't think we should have a jihad on smoking. We should try to use technological obsolescence here to move from one type of product to another. Just as there are people who like vinyl records and don't have digital downloads or CDs or whatever, the people who use vinyl records, I'm fine with that. Few people want to smoke, I'm fine with that. As long as they have the alternatives and the alternatives are good enough for them to switch, that's good enough for me.
Okay, I'll just just want to get through two more, but they have to be brief. We've only got 2 minutes, so David.
Right, thank you. David Dawn, apparently still angry. And I am, and I've got good reason to be angry. The whole TPD thing coming in, I was told by someone who was very active in it, on the opposite side from me, that she thought it had reduced prices for vaping in the UK. And I want to bring everybody's attention to a lady called Mary Proctor, who Facebooked me. I know, I'm sorry. She Facebooked me just over a week ago to say I'm going back to fags. Because the effect of regulation is to put up prices. As the manufacturers here can attest, if you've got 250,000 pages of PMTA to put in order to get a product onto the market, you don't get that for nothing. It doesn't come for free. If you're making juices in the UK and you've got to notify every last one, the MHRA was very good and dropped the fee down to something reasonable, but apparently it's way more expensive in Holland and it's more expensive everywhere else. It puts up the cost, especially if you've got a good roster of all of the flavours that haven't been banned in your territory. And those prices go up, and there's only one way you can maintain your profitability, and that's by passing these extra costs onto us, the consumers. So Mary's juice that she was buying pre-TPD in 60ml and 120ml bottles were costing her 15 quid for the 60ml and 17.50, I don't know, 25 quid for the 120ml bottle. And now that juice that she wants to use is £5 for a 10ml bottle. Mary Proctor was a 20-a-day smoker. In the UK now, that's around £10. For her vaping, per day, she gets through 30 mils. She likes it. It's the pleasure principle. It works, don't knock it. £15. So she said, Dave, I'm going back to smoking. Had I not been a black marketeer, which apparently now I am, so I'm an angry black marketeer, Clive.
Well.
Note that down for next time.
No.
This angry black marketeer took her a litre bottle of 36 milligram with a flavour that I know she likes, and I chucked the pair of them together and said, there you are, Mary, go and play. Guess what? Mary Proctor is not going back to smoking cigarettes.
We'll have to end that there, I think, David.
There is, however, one big problem. Well, it's not one big problem, it's a number of big problems. And there are researchers in the States, particularly, I wasn't going to say his name, Stanton Glantz.
Oh.
Stanton Glantz has been looking for problems. Martin McKee's been looking for problems. You mentioned Simon Chapman looking for problems. The first place they need to look when they are looking for problems with e-cigs is in the bloody mirror. They're the problem, e-cigs aren't. Thank you.
Okay. I'll just take one more now from Brian over here, and then we'll be done after that.
Yeah, I just want to talk about go back to the TPD mainly. Do you think we can afford to wait for 5 years to have a review of the TPD? And I believe it's supposed to be up to 5 years, it doesn't have to be 5 years. And given that we're supposed to be Brexited in a couple of times, could it mean that we could have the review earlier? Who reviews it? Is it the EU or is it the TRPR? And because already as well, it's already starting to conflict with current UK law. In UK, we've got the Consumers' Rights Act 2015, where it says a product must be sold as described. And the warning stickers on the hardware clearly states there's nicotine in the products, and there isn't any.
Okay, a couple of quick answers and then we'll wrap up.
If we get a review in 5 years, we'll be lucky. The Commission's got a lot on its plate at the moment, including a refugee crisis and a Brexit crisis. The review in the TRP, the review clause in the TRPR is at the same time as the Commission's review clause, so it's 5 years from the date of implementation, which I believe is 2019. And 2020, no, it's 2016. So okay, so it's 2021. Given the logjam of work at both ends, the likelihood of us seeing anything happen before that is slim.
But yes, I agree with you in principle. But I think it depends on what we are doing actually. Because if we do nothing, nothing will happen. But wow. if we engaging in actually putting the message across, stuff can happen. On the UK thing, I mean, you have chosen to leave the European Union, and it depends on what deal you get. And if you get a soft Brexit, you'll likely be bound by the EU TPD for another couple of years until you sort out what you want to do in the future. The hard Brexit is a different matter, but it's quite unclear where you're going actually in terms of Brexit.
Yeah, but I believe anyway, just going back to the previous point, I believe
we're sort of out of time.
It says it's up to 5 years, not...
Yeah, look, it is up to 5 years.
Yeah.
Ryan,
so why can't they have the review before?
In theory, we can, and New Nicotine Alliance has called for that. One possible thing that could trigger it might be if the snus case is resolved successfully, and they then think, well, we have to tamper with the directive anyway, so let's open it up. But the chances are, as Peter says, they'll do these things right at the very last minute. The problem we've got in the UK is that if we leave in 2019, we'll have no influence on that review. But if we go for a soft Brexit option, we're quite likely to be bound by whatever comes next. As you know, if we were in the Norway situation where we have to comply with EU directives, but we don't get any say in them. So one of the Brexit risks that I've been flagging since the year dot is that we lose UK influence on the future of the TPD, but ultimately we, and of course everyone else in Europe, still have to comply with it. And I don't think there'll be any changes through Brexit anytime soon, partly because the government's agenda is completely congested, and secondly because they will keep options open for alignment with EU regulation until a final trade deal is settled.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there. I'd like you all to thank these wonderful presenters here for such a great discussion that we've had. Thanks very much.